Hello and welcome to another episode of Electropreneur Secrets, the Electricians Podcast. I'm your host, Clay Newmeyer. With me, as always, my esteemed co-host, Joseph, the sales bot, Lucani. And today we have an extra special guest on our mission to help you master sales, simplify pricing, and deliver premium level service. Who better to bring in than a premium service provider himself for all of us? Right. And he just wrote this book, Branded Not Blanded, Dan Antonelli from KickCharge. Welcome, Dan.
What's up, guys? So grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
truly our pleasure.
We've got a great show to unpack for you guys. And just like we were saying pre-show, Dan, there's this conversation that continues around the electrical circles, and knowing you serve electricians too, right? Like our very own client, Alan, who had such great branding and wraps designed by you. The whole thing looks fantastic. But the question always comes down to this. Should I be just going to Fiverr with my brand and going cheap and just getting the most affordable branding I can get? Or should I be going with an all-star proven track record like KickCharge and yourself? So I want to unravel that mystery today. I want to talk about that. Obviously, with you here, there's going to be a bias. And we're
this is a slight
ever so slight, right?
But we also teach marketing and sales. And so there's a huge piece of unraveling and incorporating the story, our person, and the persona that we bring forward into those brands. So that's something that we really admire about you. How can we begin this conversation, Dan? I want to put the ball in your court about the difference and maybe some of the things that you see going wrong when we go cheap versus really investing in that brand and that story.
Sure. Well, I mean, first off, on the positives of crowdsourcing, you could say, hey, we'll get a lot of different options to look at. We'll see many different varieties of styles and things like that. So, I mean, that can be a positive because you'll have many things to pick from. But if you look at the economics of the people that are working behind the scenes to actually produce those designs, you have to remember, first of all, let's say you get 50 people to participate in your contest. At that point, you've got 49 people who basically work for free and get paid zero. So, if you're okay with that concept, which to me seems rather unfair to a certain extent, but now you have to recognize that if you're one of those 49 people, how many contests can you enter per day? And how many shortcuts are you going to need to take in order to actually try to make a living on that type of platform? And so the shortcuts that we tend to see are a lot of the shortcuts are essentially blatant trademark infringement, meaning I see a logo that exists somewhere else. I'm going to basically copy 90% of the elements on that existing logo, and I'm simply going to change the name and put your name in there. And then you may love it and buy it and then not even know or realize that it's actually the intellectual property of someone else. So we've seen, countless, unfortunately, countless examples of folks who have crowdsourced their branding, wrapped several trucks, only to be served a cease and desist later on when the actual owner of that intellectual property enforces their trademark, and you have no recourse. Like Fiverr will not reimburse you. Good luck with the guy who designed it for you and tracking him down and saying, hey dude, you sold me a logo that belongs to someone else. Can you reimburse me for the $15,000-$25,000 worth of wraps that I just invested in? So there's a sense of there's definitely a sense of risk involved. Has it ever worked? I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's never worked, but I think you also have to really understand a lot of the fundamentals of what branding really is and recognize that those platforms don't really dive deep enough into that. Now, if you're starting, you have no money, you have no budget, I would probably recommend, or rather you go to actually maybe go to the sign company then, or the wrap company and work with him. At least in that environment, you have perhaps the ability to have recourse if something goes horribly wrong, like trademark infringement. We had this happen it was like a week ago, and like the poor guy posted it. He was so proud of his new logo. He posted it on House Call Pros, and it was a ripoff of one of our brands, like blatant, like it wasn't. And
Like,
I
wasn't even
don't know
close.
that the guy knew, he didn't know at that point, and he went to a sign company that basically had stolen the work from us and then just put his name on it. And so it was kind of sad in a way because, the poor guy was so proud of it and everything. And now he's really going to have to, unfortunately, take it all off. And our client, sent them a cease and desist and that stuff. So there's those inherent risks in it. And then you also just have, to me, branding is a dialogue that you have with people, and those platforms don't support that dialogue. And so you also are putting the job and the task of deciding what is in your own company's best interest on you. Now then I would liken that to me trying to figure out, how I, upgrade my 200 amp circuit or my 200 amp panel into a 400 amp, and, you're watching a couple of YouTubes trying to figure out how to do that, and so there's that element of risk as well, in the sense that, are you actually even qualified to make that decision? Do you have enough knowledge about who the brand needs to speak to, how it needs to effectively work on a truck wrap, how it needs to translate on a business card, on a website, all these other things? Are you qualified to make that decision? Then maybe that platform is okay for you. But a lot of times, most owners don't really understand the implications of it. They don't understand how to leverage it into a larger brand story, what it means for culture, what it means for recruitment, all those aspects of it. So, again, not everyone can afford to hire, a branding agency, and certainly we understand and respect that. And that's really one of the reasons why I wrote the book, because I wanted to at least try to give a roadmap for someone that is either brand new and starting, deciding to go out on their own, and how do I do this? What are the things I should be looking at? And so all the knowledge that I think I've accumulated over the last 20 years or so working with home service companies, I basically just put everything I could into that book to try to help them understand, really who it is we're targeting, this stuff about consumer psychology behind purchases. And you guys understand a lot about branding too, as far as how much easier it is to sell and to increase your average tickets and to have Mrs. Jones feel value in what you provide when you have a better brand. Like if you don't, it's very difficult to, increase your average ticket. It's very difficult to show value because there's a low expectation about what it is that you deliver. So all those, a lot of those, I think really important nuggets of information are in the book. And the other really critical part of the brand is the idea that, the weaker the brand, the more money you will ultimately spend to market it. So I tend to look with, if we're still talking about Fiverr and those environments, I always kind of say, half jokingly, that the most expensive logo you'll ever buy is one you paid the least for. Because it may feel like, oh, this is great, like I saved so much money, but now maybe you've got to double your AdWords spend because nobody knows who you are, or they can't read your truck wrap, or maybe you got to spend so much more on recruitment because no one wants to work for you because it doesn't look like a place I want to work. So it costs you so much more down the road. It just may not be immediately apparent at the onset as to why this is an investment you would, preferably do from day one. And then you have the added cost of just doing everything over. So you come to me and you're already $1 million shop, and you've got, 6 trucks on the road, and now we have to redo everything. And so you've got the cost of redoing everything also to factor into that. So that was a whole, sorry if that was a little bit rambling, but
no, that's good. That's good. That's a
It's all
great
good,
start. I
man.
want to call a timeout there anyway, because there's so much value in what you just said. But I'm also seeing a parallel, and I'm thinking Joe's thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I
We,
wanted to
as
jump in on
premium
that.
service providers, even guys trying to bring that game to the next level, are sitting here cursing the guys that don't, that come in underpricing themselves, pricing themselves out and driving that rat race. And we'll
yeah,
curse them out and then personally go and make this maybe less than ideal investment. Joe, is that what you were thinking there too?
So I actually wanted to say two things. One, I wanted to say the obvious, which was, Dan, you have a lot of value, but something that really stood out was you made an accurate 200 to 400 amp reference for a non-electrician. I mean, I'm sitting there like, my first thought was, who's YouTubing a 400 amp service? But you're right. Crazy, right?
Dan
But
is.
I actually wanted to particularly stitch your book because you said something in particular that really stood out, which was when they say branding is expensive, consider how expensive poor branding is for so many service companies. I read that and I was like, it's so true because you're right. Like personally, I remember doing when we did the wraps in our company, we were just doing with a heat gun that we printed out of a vinyl shop in our driveway at a condo. There was nothing special at the time. But at the same time, if your brand doesn't stand out, I can imagine that you're actually paying for it throughout the years.
Mhm.
Because if you're unremarkable and people can't say, why should I use you? I can't see the reason for it.
Yeah, and I'll give you like a quick. I'll give you just a real quick example about that. Like it's a client of ours that had crowdsourced their logo and put on their truck. And if I showed it to you, you would say, yeah, it looks okay. It was like orange and it was legible. And I think, Joe, you might have been at one of the workshops that I was speaking at, and you might have seen this example. But it was kind of a weird last name brand, and they had a call tracking number on it, and so they knew exactly how much revenue were attributed to the truck wraps. And this is the sad part of it. It was actually zero for 9 months. So not a single phone call for 9 months. We redesigned the whole thing. We created a mascot that related back to their name. We made it very fun, very memorable, very disruptive. And I think it was 83 or 80 something phone calls directly attributed to the new truck wraps within 6 months of launching. So okay, so yeah, it was cheap for me to get the initial logo crowdsourced. I still had to pay to get the wrap done, but now 6 months later, I've got no phone calls from this endeavor. And so, we have so many of those examples where it's literally like night and day, especially if you have metrics via call tracking. Just another guy yesterday, it was the same thing. It was like crazy numbers, and he had a white van, which, I talk about in the book about white van syndrome. And then we did something very impactful, very colorful. And again, his numbers were like a 10x. I think it was an 11x increase in revenue within the first year, directly attributed to the new branding.
Wow.
So, again, he had vinyl lettering on a white truck. So it's maybe not a great comparison to a full wrap, but nonetheless, that's what he thought he needed to be doing. Like, hey, I'm in business. Let me get some lettering on my white van, and people will call me because of that. And, of course, no one did. And so like a lot of that. So when we talk about how much it costs, to not do it well, that's part of the cost is just, okay, so he didn't get any phone calls from the truck. So what did he have to do? Well, then he had to find lead sources elsewhere. He had to spend more money with his SEO company. He had to spend more money on GMB. Like all these things relate back to the deficiency of the branding from day one. So obviously, again, not everyone can go into it day one investing in a branding. If you can, I think it's the smartest thing you'll do because it'll just pay off within very quickly. It'll pay for itself. But if you can't, just recognize at a certain point, the longer you wait to do it, just the more expensive it becomes. There's just more things you have to do over, more things you have to change. That's even why naming, like the biggest chapter in the whole book, I think, is on naming. And that's a critical aspect as well, where, hey, I've been working as a helper for someone. I finally got my own license. I'm going out on my own. What am I going to call it? I'm going to call it, J. Lucchini Electrical.
Okay.
Yeah. Because no one else has got that name, right? And it's because of me, and I'm super proud. It's my name, and that's what I'm going to call it. And again, we talk about last name brands. What's the challenge with them? Why that's not a good idea? And we go through that. So again, like I almost wish this was like required reading for anyone that's thinking about starting their own home service business. Read this, and I think that it'll save you just a ton of heartache down the road.
Yeah, go ahead,
I
Joe.
just want to throw one thing in there if that's okay, because you mentioned last name brands, but there was one last name that, if it's okay if I stitch for a second, Bueller. It's one of those
Bueller,
last
exception to
names.
the rule.
It's
Exception
an
to the
exception
rule.
to the rule.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. Jason's a great guy, really, really good dude. I've got nothing but good things to say about him.
Yeah.
But you think about the brand and you're like, okay, you see this big head on the side of your van and stay cooler with Bueller. Like, okay, that sounds like you take a last name brand that actually sticks with something.
Yeah. And let's talk about him for a second, because he's a great example of the idea of, again, investing in the branding and then not needing to spend as much money on advertising. So he was in business about 10 years before he came to us. He was at about $2.5 million in revenue. So it took him almost 10 years to get to $2.5 million in revenue. And his previous name was Air Source America. And we joke about that because it sounds like a oxygen supply company instead of like a heating and air company. So when he came to us, he was like, he's like, when I finished a job, the customer, like, he didn't know the name of the company. They would always say, "What's the name of your company again?" But they remembered Bueller, right? Because obviously a lot of people would remember Bueller. So we decided to rename him as Bueller. And the beauty of, I think, his story is that he's gone from 2.5 to, I think, 16, 17 million in revenue in about 5 years. But he's done it on a ad spend of less than 5%. So you see a lot of people talking online, and a lot of people say, "Oh, what percentage of revenue should I spend on advertising?" And you'll see some pretty crazy ranges of what people say you should be doing. And I certainly understand that there's some variables at play, and different markets might be more expensive than other markets. But when people are like, "Well, you have to spend 10% to grow," I'm like, well, maybe you need to spend 10% to grow if you got a shitty brand. Like, honestly, that's the bottom line, because, well, how did Bueller grow on a 5% spend and basically 5x the business in 5 years? Like, how did he do that? I would consider that to be pretty good growth, right? 2.5 to 16, 17 million, right? So, well, why did it happen? Well, because his brand became sticky in the consumer's minds. Like, so they knew the name of the company to call before when they needed service. So it's not like they went on Google and they were typing heating, air conditioning repair, Jacksonville, Florida. They were just typing in Bueller. So how much easier it is for you to show up at the top of a branded search keyword versus an unbranded search keyword. It's super easy, especially on a last name brand like that is so unique. So, that's why he spends not nearly as much of digital as in comparison to other companies. He doesn't need to. So when you're out there and you're virtually invisible because the branding is virtually invisible, not disruptive, not memorable, not sticky, it's going to cost you a shit ton more of money to show up on the top of Google for all these search queries that are unbranded. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But wouldn't it be better if they knew your name when they needed service? Like, I feel like some of this is painfully obvious, but it's not really, because people don't really talk about it. But if you really think about it, well, of course, like, if Mrs. Jones continues to see my truck through the neighborhood, it's sticky and memorable. She may not need service that day, but when she's ready for service, then that's when she relies on memory and the repetition of something. And so those bold, impactful graphics, whether it's a mascot-based brand or whether it's a non-mascot-based brand, whatever it is, something that's sticky and memorable is what will help her in recognition and remembering when she needs service. And also, you got to remember too that the brand is communicating something to her about the experience she might get before you even have an opportunity to ring the doorbell. So what we do is we really are ultimately trying to control what she believes about you. Like, that's I want her to understand or feel like before you get to ring the doorbell, before she even calls and talks to a CSR, she's already established in her mind a certain expectation of what it's like to do business with your company. And if that experience and expectation is based on the idea that you're professional, you're honest, you're trustworthy, okay, those are all the fears that she has about who's coming to her home. So how does the brand speak to those fears? How does it allay her concerns? So all the brand, again, is doing is trying to make her feel comfortable with who's coming through. That's why mascot brands tend to do well, because it exudes a certain sense of comfort to her. It feels a little bit more warm, right? You want to do something that's super aggressive with a big, bold mascot that looks like it's going to beat the shit out of you. Well, now you're not really addressing her fears. She's already scared about who's coming to her home? Why do I want to make her feel more intimidated by having some bold, aggressive, muscled mascot dude on the side of my van? Like, now I'm reinforcing the fact that, oh shit, like, I hope this guy's not gonna, be a psycho when he comes to my home.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you rather have like a teddy bear as your mascot rather than a muscled guy that's running at you with a wrench?
Yeah.
So definitely we talk about,
or a lightning bolt for our guys,
or a lightning bolt. Yeah. So we talk about,
people from heaven.
controlling those first impressions and using the brand as a mechanism to become sticky, and then also have her feel something. So what, if that's parked on my neighbor's driveway and I drive by and I see it, first of all, that proximity is helping, because now I see my neighbor used you, and that helps. So the local proximity part of branding is really important. But if I see it, what do I think? They're getting a shitty job. Those guys must be cheap. Or, wow, I bet you they're getting something really cool done there. And those guys look like they know what they're doing. Like, that all factors into exactly what goes through their minds when they see something. So, when you see some of the stuff that's, poorly executed, I feel bad for the sales guy that rings the doorbell with a shitty uniform and a crappy truck wrap. You've got to overcome what she already thinks about you, and she doesn't think much about you. Maybe she's neutral about you, but you've got to work to overcome that. You've got to use selling techniques, and you've got to really figure out a way to how to make her feel confident in you. But I'd rather you ring the doorbell and she already thinks you're freaking amazing. Like, oh my God, these guys are great. These guys are going to be amazing. He's so, I'm so comfortable with him, like all those things. But if I can have her think that before you get there, even better.
That's awesome.
Dan,
this is a fucking clinic. Can I just say that? Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah.
Please jump in there.
No, I was going to say, and Clay, I want to give you the moment on that as well, but he actually is speaking about part of our process, which is so important, which is the pre-arrival step, where literally what we're doing is, before you even ring the bell, before you even show up at the customer's driveway, we have certain steps to take so that we're making sure we're walking in as a 10. Now, because think about it. I mean, you just said it yourself. If you show up in a shitty uniform, you're already going on 1 foot back. Yep. You're not showing up as a 10. You're showing up as like maybe an 8 or a 9. And you've got to try to regain those points.
And you're on defense. Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
And there's already this situation. Sorry to cut you off, Joe. Just trying to fit in. There's already this situation we talk about on many episodes where the ultimate reality is the line is the problem between you and your client. The problem's between you. You're facing each other in conflict, and they're sitting there thinking, please don't sell me shit. And you're sitting there thinking, please don't see me as a salesperson just trying to sell you shit.
Right.
And talking about how the brand ties into that, I mean, this is actually brilliant. And it's one of the questions I had for you, Dan, because even when I'm on kickcharge.com, on the Kickcharge creative site, I'm seeing more than just people in suits that are professionals at their job. That's not what I see here. I see a family. I see a team. I see a picture of, there's a funny Christmas party sweater one. There's all this examples of personification. You just talk for a moment on how important it is to bring that person and that story forward. I know you addressed this a bit already, but you seem to be a master at this specifically.
Yeah, well, I think the other part of it too, as it relates to that question, is the idea of how important brand is to culture. So, we're really proud of the culture that we have here and what we've been able to build. I mean, for me and the people here, it's the coolest thing in the world to be able to change the lives of people who hire you. Like, there's just no better thing, I think, that you can be doing. And we're so grateful that every day we get to do that. Like, it's such a cool thing. Like, we have clients that, have grown substantially, been able to hire so many more people, pay their people better. Like, all those things are affecting this positive change. So to be able to be surrounded with a team that really believes in that, and a lot of the people here personally, they worked for larger companies in the advertising space, but like, okay, so we did a cool ad for Verizon. Like, whose lives did I change in that process? They sold more phones, like, okay, or, whatever. So the idea of, what we do, and the ability to affect this positive change is why a lot of people are here. But certainly we know how critical it is to create an environment where, I feel like I have teammates. Like I mean, I'm the boss, I guess, but I never refer to my people as employees. Like they're not employees of mine. They're just people I work alongside of every day. And they just perform amazing work every day. And they're passionate about what they do. But to the other point about branding and culture too, not just from what it means for us here, but for our clients is, you think about clients don't come to us and say, hey, Dan, we love your work. We want you to build a new brand because we're trying to create a better culture. Like nobody ever says that. They say, hey, we love your work. You do badass truck wraps and logos and brochures, whatever. We want to get a new brand from you. And then what they find out is on the end of this experience, like when we're done with the branding, what that actually means from a cultural perspective, what that means to their employees, how it makes their employees feel to put on the uniform now, how it makes their employees recognize this mission that they're on and what the company really stands for. So even like taglines, like when we did the branding for Amanda Triolo at Grasshopper, which is a crazy story. Yep. Basically 100,000 a year in residential to 20 million in 2.5 years. I mean, just crazy numbers. And that was a renaming. It was a name I came up with. They used to be called Initial Base. It was PMA Mechanical, I think. It's in the book. I talk about it in the book. And so we renamed her the company Grasshopper because PMA Mechanical was obviously sounded more commercial and she wanted to do more residential. But the idea of the grasshopper as being an insect that actually only moves forward. So her whole brand story revolves around the idea that forward is a way of life. So not only does that messaging speak to the consumer, but it also speaks to the employees. Like we as an organization will always be moving forward. And we will always be striving to do better and improve ourselves. And so it basically becomes this rallying cry for all their people. And I had the benefit of going to her office and seeing the incredible space. We designed all their wall wraps and the space of the inside of their location, and just seeing the enthusiasm of the people and the vibe and you couldn't, there's zero chance that would have happened under PMA Mechanical because there is no story, there is no vibe. And that's again the challenge with some names that don't even evoke any specific feeling or emotion. It's very hard to craft a story. You can craft a story to anything. Don't get me wrong. Like we did the branding for Gettle. So Gettle is the largest HVAC company in the country, maybe the world. I don't know. So we did the branding for them, and they crafted a story around the boy that we drew holding the flashlight and everything like that. But there's a lot of money involved in crafting that story. A lot of money spent on advertising. And so for the smaller guy that maybe doesn't have a huge budget to put out TV commercials and newspaper ads and things like that, I need the brand to do so much more, so much quicker, and so much cheaper, basically, is the other part of it. So, but yeah, I hope that answers your question a little bit, Clay, there.
Oh, 100%, man. 100%. That's one of the things I love about the mascot too is, and just to touch on this, again, maybe people come to you thinking they want more clients, but what they also find is more recruitment, more attraction.
Exactly. Yeah.
In the law of attraction, we've built programs around teaching how to build attraction up. Just like as an electrician walking into the supply house, there seems to be a couple types of guys. You can go boots unlaced with steel toes exposed, flopping in there, grab a donut and a coffee and go, hey boys. Or you can go in there fully suited, dressed to the nines, ready for your day, proud and happy to serve today because service is the
100%.
highest form of distinction. And everyone else in their boots with the donut half in their mouth is looking at you on the way in and the way out going, wow.
Yeah.
What's the difference?
And you see that all the time when owners are complaining, we can't get anybody to work for us. And this isn't the case in every instance, but sometimes you look at their branding, look at the truck they're going to drive, look at the uniform the guys are going to wear. And I'm like, it doesn't look like a place I would want to work either. And it's not all about the money. I get the money is a piece of it, right? The salaries and what you're going to pay people. But sometimes it just doesn't look like a place I want to be a part of. Like Amanda at Grasshopper, she doesn't have a recruitment problem. Believe me, she doesn't have a recruitment problem. You walk in that space and you want to be a part of what's going on because there's some crazy shit going on there. Right. So she doesn't have the same kind of recruitment problem that, some of these other companies have, because she's invested in the culture, she's invested in the brand, she's invested in having people feel valued there, and so she has more people just walking in trying to get a job there than worrying about, I got to place an ad because I need 10 more 10 more technicians. And she's in Albany also, by the way. And I'm not dishing the way I said Albany. It sounds like it's a terrible place. What I mean by that is
don't knock New York, dude. Come on.
It's a small place, right? So to start pushing $20 million in a small city like that, it's not like she's in Vegas or in Orange County, California, right? So like, just showed you the impact that you can have in even a small community when the branding is done. And she's basically, again, almost from zero to that amount is I think unheard of. And in my mind, like, I think she's going to be known as one of the greatest home service operators that ever lived. And I've known hundreds, thousands of them, and I just haven't seen anyone do what she's doing quite the way that she's doing it. I think she's amazing.
It's amazing. Appreciate that. There's still a brand and a story that we haven't touched on that I do want to deep dive in on here today. And very specific reasons, good reasons. As we listen to your expertise, speaking of expertise, I mean, you didn't just wake up today with all this knowledge. In fact, I believe, if I'm following your social media correctly, you just celebrated 28 years of developing what KickCharge is today.
Yeah.
Can you touch a bit on those humble beginnings and how you've built this brand of your own and some of the challenges you faced along the way?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I started actually initially pinstriping cars, right? So I was hand painted pinstripes, and then eventually people would ask you to do lettering on their cars with it. So then I started doing lettering, and then lettering led to doing signs. And then ultimately I really found my passion with truck lettering. So I was lettering vans. Probably my first van I did around 15 or 16 years old. Wow. And I got to work with home service contractors, from the age of 16, like, which is kind of crazy, right? So I was like literally 16 years old, lettering, Chevy vans in the back of my parents' backyard, and I remember one of them I did was a chimney sweep company, and then I did a plumbing company, and then I got a job at a sign shop. And that's what we got to do. And we got to do, logos for guys and put them on the side of their vans. And I just thought, like, I was in heaven. Like, that was some of the happiest times of my life, because I loved lettering. I loved working with typography, and we would hand paint these designs on these trucks. And I think even that experience is something that was extremely valuable, because you learn so much about the medium when you're immersed in it like that. And the computer has taken away some of that. So a lot of designers don't really fundamentally even understand the medium very well, because they're designing an environment that's on a screen and not really understanding as much about the reality of the canvas as you would think they should, right? So for me, like, if I was going to do lettering and I was going to add a drop shadow on something, there would need to be a reason to adding a drop shadow, as opposed to just hitting a button in Photoshop or Illustrator and making a drop shadow. And if it didn't enhance the lettering, then why was I putting it on there? So you learn a lot of these lessons about legibility, contrast, and things like that. And the guy that I worked for, him and I are actually still good friends, super good guy. He just taught me so much about the level that was expected of us from this sign shop, as far as everything that went out the door needed to be at a certain level. We were not going to churn out shit, and it needed to be at a level. And there was this magazine called Signcraft. Later on, I would be featured in it, and I actually wrote for Signcraft for about 30 years, which is kind of crazy. I had about 100 or so articles published in there. But that was the standard. So he would say, it's got to be good enough to be in Signcraft. And that was like the gold standard. Like, if you made it in Signcraft, like, that was the gold standard. So I learned a lot about that. And that philosophy certainly is carried through here. Like, we're not going to churn out shit. Like, I don't care how long it takes us. Like, it's going to be at the level that is expected for KickCharge. And that's a tough threshold. And the other thing he taught me too is the idea of just trying to make sure that you're always improving, and nothing that we do today should be considered to be good enough tomorrow. And so that threshold, like, I live and breathe that every day, but it's hard, man. Like, you guys know, it's hard to keep doing better than what you did the day before. Like we just won that contest for the HVACR business magazine tops and trucks, and we swept every single category. So there was 10 winners and we had all 10, right? So that's cool. Like, and you savor that moment. You're like, oh, this is cool. But now you're like, oh shit, like what are we gonna do next year?
Yeah, how do we beat that?
How do we beat that?
Yeah,
Like, because the
right.
year before we swept also. So like we swept 2 years in a row or 3 years in a row, I think. But like you constantly are really just trying to think about how you can do better. So that early experience of working with contractors, I loved. My parents just didn't want me to be a sign painter. They thought I'd be better off going to college. So I did go to college and I studied advertising. And I actually think that was a really good move for me, because I learned the fundamentals of marketing, the fundamentals of advertising design, learned so much about that line of business that I really wouldn't have experienced. So when we think about consumer psychology, you think about the things that go into purchasing decisions. A lot of that stuff, the fundamentals of that I learned while I was at school. And then I was still doing signs and lettering, basically like every entrepreneur. I was kind of doing that nights and weekends and on the side while I was in college. And even when I graduated, I worked at a health insurance company doing graphic design, which was, again, another important skill that I had learned, doing brochures, things like that. And I was doing the signs and the lettering nights and weekends. And finally, it just started getting crazy. Like I was putting in 90, 100-hour weeks for like months, and it was brutal. And finally, I just said to my wife, we didn't have kids at the time, which was probably a blessing, because it was a little less scary quitting my day job. So then I quit, and then that's what we've been doing since, and just focusing on design. And my idea at the time was we could be this company that a company could get everything they needed to market themselves. And everything started with that logo. So if I did the logo first, then I could do your business cards and your site sign, and I could do your website, and I could do your brochures and all those other things. And so from a very early on, I recognized like how critical that step one was. And, from that point, I mean, I think at this point we've branded over 2,000 home service contractors over the last 25 years. We're doing about 200 a year now, maybe 250, and, our plans for what we want to do in the future is, I just feel like we're just only scratching the surface of what we could be doing in terms of how many more people we can help. So we do want to grow. We do want to scale a little bit. And I just want to try to help as many contractors as we can, so I get frustrated sometimes because, we can't help as many people as we would like, mainly because we can't get the right staff. Like it's hard. The skills that you need to do branding and then understand how brand works on a vehicle, very, very, very unique skill set. So that's been our biggest obstacle to growing, but we're getting more people, and we just hired a couple more illustrators, and our timelines have reduced now. So now I think we're only booked out maybe 3 months as opposed to 6. We were 6 months out for a while. So we're getting there. So I'm excited about the future and where we're going. But, again, the more people's lives we can change, like that's what it's all about.
And Dan, can I just ask, and maybe to your benefit then, what is that preferred skill set that you guys are trying to employ at this point?
A really, really solid understanding of topography, how type works, how type needs to function in an outdoor environment, and then understanding, consumer psychology behind branding. So, you have guys that maybe maybe they can design a mascot perhaps, but then they can't do the lettering, or they can't do the type, or they don't understand how it needs to function even in that environment. That's why, a lot of mascots, especially clip art based mascots, were never intended to be actually used on a truck. So when you blow them up, all the imperfections are visible. The fact that it's not legible from a distance. There's very, very specific ways in which you design a mascot that's intended for outdoor use that most people don't understand. That's why, you see guys post, oh, here's my new logo, my new mascot. And it's sad because maybe it'll look okay on screen, but when you go to blow it up, the things that it needs to do in that outdoor environment won't function very well. So, again, issues like contrast, the stroke widths that are used to comprise it, a lot of mechanics that go in behind it, but there's just not a lot of people that get it, and the last illustrator we hired, we had 200 applicants and 2 were qualified. So that's like 1% of every person that applies was actually at the level that we would need them to be on our team. So that's that's the good and the bad of being at the top of your game, is there's just not a lot of people that are really up to par for what we would need them to be doing.
So during this show, I actually attached my resume to an email, but I'm just going to cancel that now because I don't think I'm going to fit the bill, Dan.
We're not letting you go anywhere, Clay. You're too damn bad.
No, there's one more story here that's really important, and I don't think enough people are talking about it. And we're all about the electricpreneurial journey. You know, entrepreneurs who are electricians, but we're all facing this. We're all in business together here, and you've faced some serious health issues in your journey, haven't you? Are you okay talking a bit about that journey through that sort of the cause and how you overcome the health obstacles that have been in the way of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a pretty hardcore cyclist and have been for maybe 25 years or so. I usually ride around 140-ish miles a week year round, working out and exercising, huge part of my life. Right. And I knew I had some challenges with my heart many years ago, and they had always been watching me and saying everything was fine. And so during COVID, I started having chest pains, and went to my original doctor, and they did a series of tests on me and declared me healthy. And I was actually supposed to start training then for the new season because it was December. So you start training usually, you're riding during the all that time, but then you really start training around January for the season coming up. And so I was sitting here in the office, and I was actually alone because we were virtual at that point, and I was still having chest pains. And I'm like, something's jacked up here. Like, this isn't normal, right? So I went to a different cardiologist who then did a different test called a cardiac catheterization. It's where they thread like a catheter into your heart and then inject it with dye, and they kind of watch it on the screen. And so it's kind of funny. I was having the test done, and they go to the first two arteries in the back of the heart, and they inject it. And I'm watching it on a big flat panel screen, and you see it light up like a Christmas tree. And I'm like, oh, that looks good. Like, it's going where all the shit's supposed to go, right? And then they did the widowmaker artery, which is the main artery of the heart, and injected it in there. And then it basically hit a blockage and just like stopped. And I'm watching that on the screen, and I'm looking back, it's kind of funny, but at the time, maybe it wasn't so funny when I said, like, I'm like, dude, I'm no cardiologist, but I do think that's kind of a problem. And he got real serious, and he's like, yeah, it's a problem, and I don't think I can fix it right now. So before I went in, he was like, if I find something, I can usually stent it and fix it, right? So now he's telling me there's a problem and he can't fix it. So they wound up doing double bypass surgery on me a couple of weeks later. And that experience was, probably the best thing outside of obviously not dying, right? So the not dying part was super cool, because he had basically said I was super close to basically them finding me on the side of a road. And, because the widowmaker heart attacks are like 95% fatal. So if you're not near a hospital or someone doing CPR and you have a widowmaker artery, usually it's DOA, right? So you go through that experience. Obviously, you recognize that our days here are numbered, and that you don't have, you're only immortal for a limited time, right? And it forced me to, just sort of recalculate my life a little bit. And I stepped outside. I stepped away from actually running the agency. I actually don't run the agency day to day anymore. I have an operations manager, and she runs the agency. And I get to do the cool stuff, which I love about starting this company, which is working on logos and brands. So that's been a really healthy thing for me as well. And then I got to do some stuff, like I built a house down the shore, which should be done in actually 2 weeks, fortunately. So I bought a piece of land on the water, and my wife and I built like our dream house. And that was a result of coming home from the hospital. And like, literally we were watching these, beachfront renovation shows. And I said to her, like, why aren't we doing, like, why don't we get a beachfront renovation? Like, like, we grew up on the shore, the Jersey Shore. So like, why don't we do this? Mm-hmm. And we didn't really have a good answer to that. And I think people always think that you have this time to do the things that you want to do. And you recognize, well, I almost didn't have the time to do anything past that point. So why do we need to wait? Like, what is this benchmark that we're waiting to do the things that we think are really important in our lives, or the things that we want to invest in? And so within within like, I think 8 weeks or 10 weeks of the surgery, when I was allowed to start driving again, like I drove down and, we found this beautiful piece of land and put money down on it, and, it's going to be done. And then like, so, not only that, I think the idea of gratitude is the other piece of the puzzle, right? So you recognize that, first of all, just being grateful that you're here, right? So you're grateful, again, the obvious that you didn't die, right? But you're grateful that you have the opportunity to be with your family longer, to be with your teammates longer, and that every day is really that blessing. So, on the anniversary of when I have that heart surgery, I mean, I would literally like think about how many days I've been gifted, right? So, it's almost 1,000 days that I've been gifted since the surgery. And that's really the way I look at it. And so I just try to always keep that sense of gratitude really at the forefront of my mindset. Don't sweat the small stuff. A lot of the stuff that's going on, most of it's bullshit. Like most of it doesn't matter, honestly, at the end of the day, right? I mean, I know what we do here is really important, but the small stuff and the things that you really let get to you, most of it's irrelevant. It really is. And so when they wheel you into that OR, right, and you're stripped naked basically, and they wheel you in and you're under these bright lights, and then you recognize at that point, first of all, there's no hearse with luggage racks that's following you to the funeral home, right? And you're like, well, what was the shit that was really important, and what is this shit that was not important that I stressed during my lifetime over? So I look at that event as the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I'm so grateful for that experience. It's been, I think I'm a better husband, a better father, a better boss, all those things. And, I think it would be nice for a lot of people not to need to go through something like that to understand it. Really? But I recognize it. It's easy for me to say that. And, sometimes you need an event like that to sort of trigger some change in mindset.
Yeah.
So
that's an incredible journey. And I thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
There's a quote that's coming to mind, and we've been saying it a lot lately, is show me someone with good health and I'll show you someone with 1,000 wants, desires. Show me someone without good health and I'll show you someone with just one.
Right.
Right. Where it all comes down to. We've all heard the stories of the richest people, the wealthiest, the people that had it all. And when they're on their deathbeds, they all are just looking for one thing.
Absolutely.
Healthy again.
More time,
absolutely.
More health.
And I think also too, when you think about gratitude as a fundamental principle and guiding principle for even just running a company, if you guys, I'm sure are familiar with Tommy Mello. I don't know if you've read Tommy Mello's new book, Elevate. But
we lost
Joe. You got it.
Imagine he's grabbing it.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
So you think about the idea again of how do we build an environment and a culture where all your teammates win, not just you as the owner. And I love that about Tommy and what Tommy speaks about in that book. And so again, just being grateful for, even while I was out, like I couldn't work for like a month. Like I was a mess. Like I had these delusions that like, I'm going to be back at work within like 2 weeks of that surgery. And I came home from the hospital after a week, and it's no joke, man. I mean, they saw you in half and they stitch it all back together. It's no joke. Like I don't recommend it if you can avoid it.
Loud and clear. If we can avoid double bypass surgery, I will do everything I can. I already stopped smoking. I'm like, what else do you need me to do?
Yeah.
I've already written it on my whiteboard. Avoid the widowmaker.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you just recognize too, like, oh my God, how many people pitched in to make that almost like a non-event for the agency. Like we didn't lose sales. Like everything functioned perfectly. So I was like, oh, this is cool. Like they don't even really need me there anymore. And on some level, like you want to think that you're the most important thing there, but on the other level, it was really great to know that I built such a great team that I don't need to be here if I don't have to be here. You know what I mean? Like, so it was good to be able to that, and you got forced into that. So you have this mindset that only you can do all this shit, right? Yeah. But then suddenly you can't do any of this shit, and then you see these people step up and really rise to the occasion. And so that was a great experience for me too, because I recognize like, why am I involved in shit with payroll and HR and any of those? Like, why? Like, I didn't start this company to deal with any of that stuff. I started this company because I love doing brands and logos and trucks.
Yeah.
So it was great to see how well we did in my absence. And then from that point on, I was like, I'm not running day to day. You handle it, like, and it's been a great thing. I think everyone likes it better that actually I'm not as involved in some of those things. So, because I think I'm just happier in general also just because of that. So,
Yeah, turn the page, right? And so many people need to hear that. So I really appreciate you sharing that. I've got just one more health question, really. And we're on here all the time. In our values, we always say health, family, then business. And for so many of us, for so many of the people watching or listening to this right now, that's not the case. We think we're focused on us and everything we want, but in reality, the business is run rampant on the schedule. We're working overtime for clients just to try to appease them, and then giving family what's left. And in moments like this, I feel like you start to realize again this health piece, how
mhm.
important it really is to work on us and have something going for us. And I
Yeah.
want to tie in something important you said to that, because you said you've been cycling 140 miles a week for 20 plus years. Is that right?
Yeah, about 7,000 miles a year, roughly. Yeah.
Is that a big piece of that? Was there a personal journey you're on, or do you just like it
Yeah.
the
I
way
mean,
it's
honestly,
shaped?
the personal journey on that and how I got started cycling was I had been into cycling a lot when I was younger. And then I actually stopped cycling. And while I was in college, I really got into bodybuilding. I'm sure I don't look like tremendously ripped right now, but I used to lift pretty heavy weights when I was younger. And then I started working and then I stopped everything. So it was no cycling, it was no working out. And my father passed away and it was 1999 and I hadn't worn a suit for about 4 years. And the couple of days before the funeral, I went to go put on a suit, and I had put on like 40 pounds. So I was like 185 pounds or so. And I was like, this is like a bad thing right now. And then I was like, well, if I want to lose weight, what was the thing I was really into when I was younger? And I was like, well, I used to love riding bikes. So I bought a road bike and I started cycling, and then I actually started racing road bikes. And I dropped like the 45 pounds. I think I dropped it in like 6 months or so. And I've literally been the same weight. I'm like 150 now. But I've been like 150 for 20 years.
Wow.
And basically because of the cycling. So I'll give or take a couple of pounds. So that passion of the cycling really helps. But the other thing too, to your point, is like the mindset of the grind, right? So you hear guys, oh, fucking grinding. You got to grind, keep grinding. It's all about grinding, right? And then you're like, at what cost does it come? And I think a lot of social media, celebrities push the grind, and then you sort of feel like you're a lazy piece of shit if you're not grinding like 20 hours a day. And I find for me sometimes my most productive hours are spent on a bike because I'm clearly focused. I have no interruptions. I ride with headphones, but I have my headphones and my music. And where I live out here in New Jersey, which may sound crazy to people, is very, very rural. So there's just cows and cornfields like out here. So I'm really, really focused and I can think very clearly when I'm on a bike. So it may look like, well, I'm not really working because I'm riding my bike, but I am thinking about things and I'm able to focus on things. And I think sometimes some of my most creative brands have come from bike rides. And you start thinking, hey, I could be doing that. And your mind just starts going with it. And I'm not distracted by text or Facebook or, chats from the team. I'm just really in my own little zone there. So yeah, I do the cycling, and then I started lifting weights after the heart surgery because that was something else that was really interested. So I go to the gym 3 days a week, and then I ride the bike usually 5 or 6 days a week.
Wow.
And
Pretty impressive.
yeah,
So you
yeah.
actually just answered one of my last questions I have for you as the hour's winding down here, Dan. I'm going to ask it anyways because it's that powerful. Could you be where you are without that personal journey, without the cycling, without the weightlifting, without taking care of yourself first?
Um, It's interesting what the doctors have said is the cycling kept me alive up until the point of when I had the blockages. But they said that would have been what would have killed me if I had continued and not gotten it fixed. So the cycling actually did keep me alive because the heart tries to find pathways to deliver the oxygen and the blood where it's, basically circumventing where the blockages are. So all that exercise really did keep me alive. So I'm totally convinced if I hadn't been exercising, I would have been dead a long time ago, for sure, 100%. Yeah. So one thing I'm going to share as a PSA while we have just this opportunity is a test called a cardiac calcium score. Okay. So this is a test that's like $100. You can do it yourself. You don't need a doctor. And it'll measure the amount of plaque that is in your heart. Okay. And that's a good indicator of cardiac health. So it'll say, depending on your scoring, will give you an indication as to whether or not you may have cardiovascular disease. So that particular test I had done many years ago, it did identify that I had a substantial amount of plaque in my arteries. We did some things to try to control that. My cholesterol from a hereditary standpoint was already high, right? So we got the cholesterol numbers super low. Like my cholesterol numbers for the last 6 years have been like 120 for cholesterol and LDL at like 40. Those are ridiculously low numbers, but my body still continues to produce cholesterol. There's really nothing I can do. Diet doesn't really affect it and stuff like that. It's just a hereditary thing. Yeah. But that particular test, listen, if you're 40 years old or older, I recommend just get the test done, and it'll give you a good idea as to maybe having a problem, because otherwise you don't know. Like, I knew because I had a really good handle on what my heart should be doing at all times. And again, maybe from being athletic, and I could tell something really wasn't right. But a lot of guys write it off, or they're like, oh, that's stress, or it's a bad day. You know what I mean? But, again, just thank God I sought a second opinion and went to someone that really knew what they were doing. Otherwise, like I said, he it was like a 90 something percent blockages in the Widowmaker. And it was actually 2 blockages in the artery up there. So he was just like, man, you're so lucky right now. Like, I'm so, like, they almost didn't want to send me home from the hospital after the test. It was during COVID, so they thought it'd be safer for me to be home. But, it was like, they sent me home on bed rest. Honestly, it's like, you can't get out of bed. It's like,
walking
that's
comforting to the corner.
Like, that's comforting. Like, yeah, don't go up and down the stairs too many times. I'm like, seriously? So, but yeah, no, take care of yourself first. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to take care of everybody else.
No, I appreciate that, Dan. You know what? I am curious, if something were to happen in your health, or as this continues to go on, Dan's no longer a part of Kick Charge Creative. I mean, this brand's going to live on. Are you going to make your own mascot for Kick Charge so that you can live on in that brand?
I don't know.
Antonelli caricature.
But if I ever, wasn't here, the amount of talent in this building and the people that we have, I think it would surprise people to know that I don't personally do every single thing that goes out the door. I know I'm the face of the brand, and I post a lot of stuff that I'm proud of that the team here has done. But I don't personally get to work on as many things as people might think. I oversee and I make sure every single brand that goes out the door I've looked at and I've given input to. So that piece of it. But you'd be surprised also how many things hit my desk and I don't have to touch it. It's perfect. They know what the expectation is. Some of these people have been here 15 years doing logos with me, so they know what to do. They know what the drill is.
Wow. So yeah, that's awesome. Okay, guys, if you've been living under a rock for a while and didn't know Dan until now, Dan, please tell people who are listening to this, our entrepreneurs, how to find you and how to, get in touch or grab your book.
Sure. Well, you can always contact us at kickcharge.com. If you're interested in getting the book and getting it from me instead of Amazon, you can always get it on Amazon just by typing in my name. But if you get it from me, it'll be autographed. It'll be worth hundreds, I assure you, down the road. So it's kickcharge.com/books. So you can order the book from me. I'll autograph it and send you some cool stuff with it. It's a little cheaper actually through our site than Amazon. Yeah, you can always hit me up on Facebook or send me a friend request, or just shoot me a message on Facebook too, and happy to answer. And listen, at the end of the day too, like if you have something that you're doing, and even if we didn't do it for you and you just want another set of eyes on it, or Dan, I'm about to get this truck done, like what do you think? Like just hit me up. I mean, the saddest thing I see is when people get stuff done that ultimately isn't going to help them. And sometimes it's simple things I could tell them to do, like, hey, just have them change this, make this white, make this black, whatever the case may be. So if you find yourself at that point and you're ready to get something done, listen, I will never not help another home service contractor that's trying to build a better life for them and their family. Just, hit me up. I'm not going to try to sell you on our services in that process. I'm just going to try to tell you what about it that you can maybe improve with the person you're working to, and what to look for. Happy to give back in that manner.
That means so much. Thank you. Joe, do you have any questions before we let Dan go?
And before we let Dan go, I just want to say, Dan, honestly, we are so honored to have you here. I mean, the things that you're doing for the industry is amazing. But the one thing that I'd want to know specifically for all the electricians listening out is if you could give advice to electricians specifically, anything in particular, any little bit of nuggets that they can use to say, I'm an electrician and I want to grow my brand today. Do you have any little gleans of wisdom or nuggets you can drop on us for that?
So I would say this. One simple thing you can do is if you go on Google and you type in electrician logos, and you click on the image tab and you see all the search results that comes up. If your brand looks like something that you see in that search result, then why would anyone remember yours specifically? So just try to think about branding in a sense of, it's okay to not be obvious. It's okay to have a logo that doesn't use a lightning bolt. Like it really is. Because the more you can stand out and be disruptive, the more chance someone has to remember it. Okay. And that's ultimately the same thing you see with roofing companies. Like if you Google roofing logos and you look at the search results, they all have that, a roof peak. And I get it. Okay. Well, now I know you do roofing. What's the name of your company again? Oh, I don't really remember because I was so focused on just the roof part. I didn't really recognize the name or whatever. You know what I mean? So just try to think a little bit outside the box and avoid the really painfully obvious symbols. It's the same advice I give to an HVAC guy to stop using red and blue arrows or sun and snowflakes, because no one is really going to remember that specifically to them. It's so common. It's so overused. Just try to think about something that would be uniquely crafted for you only.
Makes a ton of sense.
That's huge.
Thank you, Dan.
Let's do something different. Like we did here today, Dan, I got to tell you, this might be one of my favorite interviews ever. We went from a clinic to tear-jerking stories to culture and helping electricians. Man, I can't thank you enough. Guys, this has been another great episode of Electropreneur Secrets, the Electricians Podcast. We're here with you 5 days a week to help you master sales, simplify pricing, and deliver premium level service. If you didn't know, marketing is directly attached to sales. If you can attract it, you might have a chance to make an offer. And Dan, the man here, has helped us do just that today. So thank you guys very much. We'll see you again next time.
Thanks, guys.